Hi everyone, welcome to my channel if you're new here, or welcome back to my channel if you're a returning viewer or subscriber. In today's video I'm going to be giving you lots of fall or autumn book recs, books that I think are perfect to read during this season we have just entered. Today's actually quite a warm day, and here in the UK we've got this long stretch of quite hot weather, but I know that the second this leaves we're going to be hit full force with like a 9-month long winter. So this video's come a little bit early so that I can prepare you for what books you might want to pick up across these next few months. I've just got them all stacked on my bed, and they're kind of in actually like a height order, just so my stack doesn't fall over. But other than that, everything is kind of, you know, completely random. There is quite a lot of fantasy here, but I do have a good mixture of kind of more literary fiction, contemporary works, and historical fiction. We've got some classics, the whole works. So if you enjoyed the video along the way, give it a thumbs up. That's how I can tell that you did. Subscribe if you like what you see and want to stick around. Let's get going with the first book. So the first book I have to mention is actually the one that I'm going to find the most difficult to talk about. It is a book that I read when I was like 14, but I just couldn't miss it off because I saw it today on my shelves. I was like, this is perfect for the season, especially if you haven't read it already. But even just to do a reread, which I'm definitely due for. I've got a hideous edition of this book. It's very beaten up because I carried it around in my school bag. It's the same with all the books that I studied. They're all kind of rough, and this one's actually torn and bent, and the spine's completely cracked and everything like that. But the book that I'm recommending is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So yes, this is a classic. This is actually a modern classic. Kind of rude. So in this book we're following our main character, who actually I don't think she has a name, but she's just married this man called Max de Winter. She has a lovely honeymoon kind of trip with him, and then they get back to his great estate. While she's there, our unnamed protagonist is haunted by this woman called Rebecca, who is the ex-wife of Max de Winter. This book definitely does have kind of ghost vibes because of this haunting. Rebecca's this kind of unknown, like elusive figure in the protagonist's life. It's very kind of eerie and spooky, but in kind of like that dark gothic way, not in a actual like terrifying way. There's like an unease to it, something is going on. Even though I read it when I was 14, I did enjoy it at the time. I think a little bit of it went over my head, but like I said, I'm definitely due a reread. It's a book that I'm definitely want to revisit. This book is also inspired by Jane Eyre, so that's a book that you could pick up, but for me, Jane Eyre and pretty much all the Bronte sisters works remind me of winter, so that's that. But yeah, if you read this one and get hooked on it, I do recommend picking up Jane Eyre because it's the superior book. But yeah, I'm recommending this one. Next up we have Velvet Was the Night by Silvia moreno-garcia. I also want to recommend Mexican Gothic by the same author. This is again kind of like going on with the spooky vibes, but yeah, this book is set in Mexico City in the 1970s. I gave this book about 3 stars and Mexican Gothic about 3.5, but the thing that's amazing about this author's works is the atmosphere that she creates. This one's kind of like a noir inspired setting, historical fiction, as you can tell, and it has a bit of a mystery plotline as well. Mexican Gothic actually falls under horror. It is a very light horror. I really don't get on with that. I just, things that are actually scary I don't want anything to do with, but Mexican Gothic was great because it leans a little bit towards that way, but it's not completely terrifying. There were a couple of moments that I was like, I don't want to be reading this right now because it's the middle of the night, but other than that it was fine. But definitely gave you that atmosphere. So yeah, this one, like I said, is a noir setting. We're following this disappearance of this woman, and this other woman gets caught up in it. Good book, amazing setting. And while there's like quite a lot of hot weather and stuff going on in this book, I still think it's appropriate for the season. Mexican Gothic is set in this kind of haunted house. A lot of it's to do with like fungi and mushrooms and things like that, which is obviously perfect for like October, November time. And though that one's also set in Mexico, it's set further up in the mountains, so the atmosphere is very cold. It's immaculate for the season. I definitely do recommend that one over Velvet Was the Night, but that's worth reading. I have a fantasy recommendation next. I have Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is a book that I gave about 3.5 stars. I think I was underwhelmed by it, but I think that's because it was very hyped like a few years ago, but now like the hype's gone down. It's one that I think I could recommend to you because you don't have to go into it with like super high expectations. But what I did love about this book is the world building. The world is amazing. It's super duper original. So we're following Lazo Strange, and he is obsessed with this magical lost city called Weep. He actually works in a library. He studies that city, and lots of people think he's ridiculous because it's made up or whatever, but actually there are these legends of the city and he believes them to be true. He then gets the opportunity to maybe go to Weep, and things kind of kick off from there. It's a book full of legendary warriors and gods and everything like that, but it's also a book that's deeply centered in like knowledge, so it definitely lends itself kind of into the academia aesthetic, especially the kind of like light academia aesthetic, which is why I thought it would be perfect for this next few months. I also think that if you're sick of reading fantasy books, They just feel like they're all the same. This is another good one to pick up. It is quite long, it's over 500 pages. I think it's a really interesting book. It also is the first book in a duology, so it's quite satisfying to be able to, you know, kind of bash out a series without needing to read like 6 books or something. Going down the academia route, I of course have to recommend The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I gave this book a 4 stars. Again, I kind of got swept away with the hype. I came out the end a little bit disappointed. This book is about the murder of this boy called Bunny. It's set in New England and it's set at this East Coast college, so the vibes are absolutely immaculate. I really don't think there's a better time of year to be reading this book except maybe winter, but despite how it looks, it is quite a long book, so I feel like you could kind of head into winter. Maybe this is like a November read. The atmosphere is brilliant. That's the bit that I kind of wish this book could run along with a bit more. First half of it is very much set in the classroom, but then it kind of turns into a bit of a police investigation, so there's definitely that kind of mystery plot line, which again is perfect for the season, but kind of not what I wanted so much out of the book. But yeah, my own thoughts aside, I do recommend this book to other people. I think that it's definitely worth reading, and I'm absolutely certain that it might be a book that you could love. It's a lot of people's kind of #1 favourite book, so definitely worth giving it a go. The Idiot by Elif batuman. This is another book that feels kind of academic, definitely more the light academia. It's set in 1995 and following Selin, and she is starting Harvard, and so she's in her first year. So this book covers kind of all the 4 seasons. I think you could read this book in any season, which is the reason why it kind of crops up in a lot of my recommendation videos, but I think that if I had to choose one time to read it, it would be probably September. I read this book myself in October. This is one of my favourite books. I was actually thinking as I was getting this book out that if someone asked me what my favourite book was, like today, I would say this one. So I want you to read it regardless of the season. The Antidote by Shelley Sackier is a lesser known fantasy book. This one is YA, has the most amazing cover, which is also perfect for the season. But this book is set in a land where magic is outlawed. We're following Fee and her best friend Zabi, or Zabi, not sure. I think he's the crown prince, but he's dying, and Fee is a healer, but the only way that she can treat him is by using kind of like traditional medicines. She can't even use her magic to save him. So A, she has to hide her magic from the world, and B, she has to find a cure for Zabi, and she kind of travels across the kingdom in order to do so. I think I gave it 3 stars. I do think that the concept is better than the actual execution of the book, but I am here to recommend it to you because I think this is one, again, that is much more of a kind of a unique recommendation. It's one that I think people could have the potential to love. This also does kind of feel a little bit kind of cozy fantasy, just because it is about apothecaries and things like that, which I absolutely love to see in fantasy. So if you're on kind of a kick of those, then you might enjoy this one as well. The stakes are not very high except for Zabi's life, which I mean, that makes it sound high, but it's not. It was not like a stressful read, so I'm trying to say, which some fantasies feel like. It's also a really gorgeous hardcover book. So if you want to have it just to like admire as an aesthetic prop for the season, I'd also recommend it for that. Obviously joking, I recommend reading it as well. Fawkes by Nadine. There's actually not a more perfect book to recommend to you. It follows the story of Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes is the reason why we have Bonfire Night, which is remember the 5th of November, so it's literally set in the centre of the autumn season. If you're growing up in the UK, you will be very familiar with that kind of event in our calendar. This book is a historical fantasy, urban fantasy, so it's set in London, and we're following Guy Fawkes' son as his father tries to involve him in the plot to blow up Parliament. This is one of my favourite ever books. I actually give it 4.5 stars, but it is like one of those rare books that actually, in my heart, it's a 6 star. But if I have to be kind of practical and honest about my rating, then I do think this is probably more of a 4.5. There's a bit where it kind of slows down in the middle of the plot. Well, gunpowder plot. Other than that, like, this is so precious to me. It means everything. And I've actually reread this book and I loved it just as much on the reread. This is my most have book by far as well. I love this book. I recommend it till the day I die. This Savage Song by Schwab. This book, or Victoria Schwab even, this book is kind of picking up in popularity at the moment because her Darker Shade of Magic series is kind of being brought out of the past. That was a series that came out a long time ago, but they've recently given new paperback covers and everything like that, and lots of people are reading it and really enjoying it again. So I think this is another one that could become more popular. This book is great because it has this kind of monster plotline. It's very kind of dark feeling. The atmosphere of this book feels very, not tense, but like gloomy, I'd say. It's definitely one that I recommend kind of picking up in the October season. I think I did actually read this book around then, and I really enjoyed it. I gave this 4 stars. We're following Kate and we're following August. Kate is the daughter of this man who works, he's like the governor of the city or something like that. He works very high up in it anyways. And then August is actually a monster, kind of questions what a monster is, along the kind of same route as Frankenstein, which is a book I actually haven't read, which is why I'm not recommending it to you, but it has similar to themes to this book, I guess. But it's about people who are monsters and then people who are not. The people who are not are terrified of the monsters and also treat them really poorly, but actually the monsters kind of have more humanity than the people do. And Kate, as a human, can see the good in August. Kate and August are the only two who see both sides and the only two who do something. But how do you decide to be a hero or a villain when it's hard to tell which is which? There is also a kind of a platonic relationship between these two characters, male-female relationship, which is nice to see as well. This book again is a duology, and I'm not sure whether that friendship turns into something more in the second book, but at least the first book it is just purely platonic. Another Dark Academia classic, one that I can't not recommend to you, can't not recommend, is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is another 4-star read for me. I kind of wish it was better than it is. There's a common theme with Dark Academia books. I think maybe because there's not many of them, but the ones that are out there are really well loved. But what I will say about this book is the writing is beautiful. So I'm sure you've heard of this plot before, but this book follows Dorian Gray, who gets a portrait painted of him, and he actually makes this kind of Faustian agreement, I guess. That's not the phrase I'm thinking of. Maybe it is. Where he makes a deal with the devil. It's not actually the devil, but he makes a deal. And it means that the portrait will age and Dorian will stay beautiful and youthful. He's very vain, as you can tell. His portrait just decays and he stays as a boy. Aspects of his personality kind of start to come out, and then there's this big kind of plot twist at the end. Writing is fantastic. It actually brought me to tears with how beautiful it is, which is something that very, very, very rarely happens. I think it's only happened like 2 other times other than this book, and I've read a lot of books in my lifetime. But yeah, another one that I think is great to read, one I picked up this year. Lastly, I have 2 fantasy books. They're kind of similar to each other because they both feature fae. The first is one that is so well loved. If you're at all interested in the fantasy genre, then I really, really recommend picking this one up because it's one of my favourite ever series. In my opinion, the first book is just as good as its sequels, but I know that a lot of people prefer the second book, The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This book is urban fantasy technically, but there is like a fae land outside of the world. We're following Jude, who is a human, so she's mortal and she is living in the fantasy world. It's a lot to do with the politics of the fairyland, the way that she's treated by the prince, the Cruel Prince. He's one of the sons of the king. This story is amazing. The setting and the world is so magical and beautiful. There's actually a map at the front of this book that perfectly just captures everything. I have this thing called aphantasia where I can't picture things in my head. It really sucks. Like, it's something that I didn't even know I had, and then I found out and I was like, that is truly like one of the worst discoveries of my life. But this book felt so vivid in my mind, even though it wasn't something I could properly imagine, which is magical. So good. Amazing, amazing fae as well. They're kind of tricksters, they're very cunning and things like that, which is such a good representation of what like the traditional fairy is. Books that just fell over, but we're on to our final book, and that is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a book that I also feel like was slightly overhyped, but I did still enjoy it. I just think it's slightly too short. I know that so many people gave this book kind of 4 or 5 stars. It is a standalone, like, quick read if it's something you're interested in, because I know that we don't all want to commit to a series. This also has like one of the most beautiful covers on my bookshelves. I think it is so stunning. It's art by Charlie Bowater. Aside from that, this book is set in the autumn court, I believe, which is just set across autumn time. When I was thinking like I need to make a video on autumn book recommendations, this is the book that first came to mind, the book that comes to mind when I think of autumn. There's lots of descriptions of kind of the autumn foliage as they're walking through the woods and things like that. But we're following Isabel. I think she's a human. I just looked at her ears to check. But she is a portrait artist. And one day she paints a portrait of the fairy prince, whatever. He's a fairy who's like high up. She paints mortal sorrow in his eyes, which is kind of a crime that means that she should be like trialed and then put to death. So he takes her with him. They do a lot of traveling to get to the place where she's going to go on trial. The majority of this book is them traveling to this trial, but across the course of that they fall in love and things start to change. So it's kind of like a little bit of enemies to lovers, or I guess a lot of enemies to lovers. If you want a book that's like walking through an autumn wood, then this is it. So let's tally up how many books I mentioned. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 autumn book recommendations for you. I hope this was helpful. I hope I mentioned at least one book that you haven't heard of and you might be interested in picking up. Leave any other recommendations you have for me or anyone else down below in the comments if you feel like doing so. And yeah, stick around if you want to stick around by subscribing. And I'll see you very, very soon, in a couple of days for another video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.